So I'd like to welcome everyone to our next round of our webinar series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the engineering professions. And we have both Allison Ross and Amberle Kurkowski here to talk to us and share their experiences with us this evening. Ladies, if you don't mind, a brief introduction of yourself and what you're doing now and what got you there. Amberle, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Amberle Kurkowski. I started my own, well, start from the beginning. I graduated in 2007 from West Point. After that, I did 5 years in the Army as a military police officer. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in history, and then while I was in the Army, I did my MBA. And then when I got out of the Army, I did my master's science in electrical engineering. My husband got his professional engineering license right after I got out of the military. So we decided to start our own engineering firm. And we've been growing that firm for the last 6 years. So it started with just a few small projects, but then it turned into one of us needing to quit our job. And then so from there, I quit my job and then I started running the business full time, meeting with all of our clients. And then my husband left his job 2 years ago and came on board full time with the firm. So we mainly do commercial construction. We do mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural design for commercial buildings.
Awesome. Thanks, Amberle. Allison?
Yep.
I graduated in 2001 with a degree in environmental science, and I was AG for 5 years. Got out after 5 years. I knew I wanted to get a master's degree, so I went back to school for my master's in environmental science. My master's program was primarily focused on sustainable food production, and as part of that program and attending some conferences in my area, I met folks that were involved in the energy intensity of food production and made some connections with my current company, which is Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. So currently I'm a certified energy manager, and I do the bulk of my work with evaluating energy efficiency and energy usage to help our customers reduce their energy use and install new and different technologies to accomplish the same end states that they're looking for while saving money on their power and energy bills. My main focuses are multifamily new construction, and because I'm currently the only veteran in our engineering group, I do all the work with the Vermont National Guard. So my other area of focus is military resiliency and microgrid systems.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for that brief introduction. Really appreciate you both spending the time with us this evening. We'll get right into it. We have some questions here to ask you both about your time in the Army and how you transitioned into the engineering profession and what advice you might have for people interested in the profession in the future. So I'm going to start with, how did you decide to pursue engineering post-Army? Neither one of you were engineer branch, so what influenced you towards that profession?
I knew, even as a cadet, in high school, that I was interested in one of two fields, either veterinary medicine or the environmental science field in some way. And I didn't really learn a lot about how broad the environmental science field could be until I started working on my master's program. I know with this coming firstie class, they're going to be doing branching based on skill set, which I think is a really good thing, but it hasn't been that way in the past. And so I never really used my bachelor's degree in the Army. And it was something that I really wanted to do. I kind of fell into the engineering portion. My degrees were environmental science, and it was with talking with folks that were involved in energy in the food system that got me a little more interested in some of the environmental engineering aspects and the energy engineering aspects. And so it was mainly just talking to folks that were in the industry, trying things out through degree programs, attending conferences that were available in the area to learn about some of the things that people were studying, both from an academic standpoint as well as some of the industry that was attending some of those conferences, to see what was going on in that industry at the time, and to see a little bit more about what might interest me. getting into the current company I was in. I knew I wanted to do this kind of work, but getting into the company was, a little bit different, having not had the degree or the background in it. And so I kind of went through it a roundabout way and ended up getting into the company in more of a project management type role, which I wasn't really wild about, but it was a company I wanted to be in. And I knew that once I was in that company, I could work my way into the job position that I wanted.
I think that's a really interesting perspective, Allison. A lot of people may be looking for a specific job and failing to recognize how important it is to get to a company that you can do.
Yeah, that was key.
What
about for you, Amberle?
So I kind of fell into the engineering company, I guess. So when I got out of the military, I went to work for a large company that worked in industrial power plants, mostly cogen power plants. And I was working for them as their district manager for the Southern United States. So my main job was I learned how to design heat trace systems. So at the time, I wasn't finished with my master's of science yet, but I did have my little bit of engineering that I'd done at West Point in the nuke track. So that math I fell back on that, and I learned how to design heat trace systems. And so I was kind of functioning as my company's engineer. And then we got our own business started like 2 years later. So I decided to leave that company and work full time for our business that me and my husband started. And from there, I started doing all the scope development and project management for all of our projects. So I just kind of fell into learning more and more about the different types of engineering that we do for commercial buildings, and then basically applying that knowledge to our different projects that we approach. So I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, so having the opportunity to start my own business was a pretty good opportunity with my husband. So we've been using his engineering license, but I'll hopefully be sitting for my exam in the next couple months. So I'll be licensed as well.
Awesome, thanks. Given both of your non-traditional backgrounds, and you've touched on it a little bit, but what preparation was required for you to enter into the field? Whether that was Amberle, as you described, getting ready to sit for your license, or Allison, as you described, kind of doing the project management. What knowledge, skills, or abilities did you find were helpful entering that field?
At least from my path, the military experience was definitely valuable. It's an experience that there's not a lot of other folks out there who can say that they have that. It is challenging, though, to translate it so that a civilian employer knows exactly what your resume says, and understands the implications of some of the military background and what that can do for them, and the skill set that they're going to get out of you when they hire you. Some of the working on my master's was also something that was really helpful, and it was a step that I knew from the environmental science field I was going to need to do and have that under my belt, because that was going to be an important thing to have on my resume in that particular field. But it also gave me the opportunity to meet other folks in that field and do a little bit of networking, having not ever worked in that field before. It opened up some doors and gave me a chance to meet other folks in that area and see what was going on in that area. So I think if I hadn't pursued the master's degree, I would have started a little blind trying to get into that field, just because I didn't have the background to pursue some of that.
Mm-hmm. Amberle?
I think what helped me get into the field was, one, my first job out of the military was working. Sorry, my internet is fading in and out. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. So my first job out of the military helped me kind of see that I wanted to pursue the engineering field. So that kind of pushed me towards figuring out what I specifically wanted to focus in engineering. And then from there, with starting our own business, like kind of seeing what needs there were in the field. Sorry, I don't have a great answer to that question.
No, I think that's great. It's really interesting as you think about transitioning out of the military and really exploring what the opportunities are there. And a lot of us, when we left service, really had no idea what was waiting for us on the outside, what the opportunities were. So using that first job, Amberle, as a stepping stool, I think is awesome. Something that for people to consider. What expected or unexpected challenges did you face in that professional transition from the military into the engineering field, and how did you overcome any of those challenges?
I think for me, it was trying to translate the military experience to the civilian world. In a lot of cases, there are things that you do in the military that really don't have a civilian component and a civilian counterpart. And so I was in interviews was very careful when I was talking, with HR reps about some of the things I did as a company commander that would be illegal, in the civilian world, like talking to one of my soldiers' doctors about her broken hip so that I didn't hurt her some more would be quite frowned upon in the civilian world. So making sure that, all of that stuff was clear, and that I wasn't going to be joining the company and breaking a whole bunch of laws, and that I understood that delineation. And I think a lot of it is trying to prove yourself. So when I first got into my organization, it was more in the project management arena. So once I got in and I learned a little bit about the company itself, I would start to ask for more work that had to do with the type of work that I'm doing now, so that as time went on, I could start to say that I had done some of these tasks and I had some experience in some of these tasks. So when a position came open in the engineering department, I was already ready to say, I have the same experience that the folks coming in from other companies with engineering backgrounds have done before.
Amberle, did you experience any challenges or any unique opportunities that arose for you?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge that I experienced was, one, trying to find a job when I got out of the military and finding something that interested me. I wanted something that would be dynamic, so trying to find a job that fit that wasn't like your standard, like, I don't know, Fortune 500 company was kind of difficult. But when I found that company, then the challenges I met was I was the only woman. It was a small company, and I was the only woman working for the company. So I got a lot of, I guess, kind of flack, like what you do in the military, just because I was the only woman. So I think their expectations were higher of me than what they were of like my counterparts. So I felt like I worked pretty hard to prove myself to the owner and to the other senior leaders in the company, to prove that I could be at the same level as what my male counterparts were.
Mm-hmm. Amberle and Allison, how many women are in your field, and what roles are they in?
I would say in the energy engineering field, it probably mirrors what the ratio is in the military. In my own company, we have a female to male ratio that's a little bit higher than the industry average. But I do a lot of customer facing work, working with mechanical, electrical engineers, architects, and even just, customer owners. And the vast majority of the time, if there's another female in the room, it's the project owner. It definitely does mirror the military's ratios. I found it pretty easy to adjust, though, having been in that environment for so long. It didn't really faze me too much. It was been there, done that. At least in the construction field, particularly in the Northeast, the proportion of folks in those professions tend to be older men. So the dynamic is also much older. And one of the challenges right now, at least in this area, is attracting some younger talent so that we can grow that talent pool for the coming decades. And we do run a few programs in this area that are designed for high school women to be introduced to some of the STEM fields, to encourage them to pursue some of that as they decide what they want to do when they get into college. But for right now, it definitely does mirror the military ratios.
Amberle, what about down in Texas?
I would have to echo Allison. There's really not a lot of women in the field down here that work in engineering or architecture. And there's a lot of old men for the most part, or who the majority I see on job sites. Anywhere from superintendents to even a lot of our investors are older men. So there's very few women that I run into on a day-to-day basis, other than like the office staff at a lot of the other firms that we work with.
That's interesting. You mentioned, both of you mentioned some similarities to the military, both in the ratio as well as to kind of the expectation of having to work a little bit harder in order to be seen as equal to your male counterparts. What other similarities are there between your experiences in engineering and the military? And was it helpful to have a background in the military? Allison, you mentioned you're one of the only veterans in your current company. So is it helpful to have that background as you transitioned into engineering?
I think for me it was. I think one thing that West Point did for us was build up a lot of the confidence in our own leadership skills and our own skill set and our ability to work with a team, and when we're in a leadership role, to delegate. So I'm going to be in the process of actually moving into an engineering management position soon. So the ability to use the talent that you have available to you when you're pursuing projects and efforts within the company. I've leaned heavily on what we've learned, both at West Point and honing in the Army. So that was a really valuable experience for me. And it also, I come across, folks all the time in the field from the customer perspective who, in mechanical engineering, particularly, sometimes the electrical engineers, there's some folks out there who don't want to be told that their way is the wrong way, or that there could be more than one way. And so you get a lot of pushback, from the folks that, maybe feel threatened from an ego point of view, and being able to put that in perspective is really helpful to both not take it personally, as well as continue to push ahead with your own goals, whether or not somebody is throwing up a roadblock.
Amberle, along that line, how are you seen as a female CEO and an engineer on the job sites in a male-dominated profession?
I mean, it's a lot like the military. I mean, it's a lot like, so I was in 1st Cavalry Division, so I was one of the only women in that unit, and it's very similar to the military, where you pretty much just have to prove to them that you know what you're talking about and you know your stuff, and then they'll respect you. But I get a lot of flack when I go out to a lot of the job sites, just because they're like, oh, you're young, you're a female, how do you even know anything about engineering? I feel like that's a common misconception that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it's just working with them and showing them that I do know what I'm talking about and that I can help them with their project. So I don't know, I guess there's still barriers that are out there.
You both have mentioned not only the fact that you're one of very few women in the profession, but also that the profession seems to be aging, that it's a bunch of old men, to quote you guys, that are operating in the profession right now. It sounds like the field is not very diverse. Is it understood that diversity brings value, and if so, why? And what is being done in order to try to increase diversity in the field?
Within my own company, my parent company is a nonprofit with a social justice mission revolving around energy and environmental problems. So pursuing diversity is something that my company in particular makes an effort to do. We have a little bit more diversity in our company out of our Ohio and Washington, D.C. offices, just because of the population in that area. The state of Vermont is statistically the whitest state in the nation. And so while we do have a little bit of diversity within our organization, our diversity reflects the diversity across the state. In our program management division, we actually have someone there who was an Iraqi interpreter for an American military unit. He is an Iraqi citizen, and he came to the States on a special visa because he risked his own and his family's life by being a Arabic interpreter for our forces. So he is one of just a handful of folks who are not, white Caucasian ancestry. I think it is really valuable to have some women. I think that seeing, working with some of the women in my department and some of the men, as well as, the few female engineers I come across, there is slightly a different perspective that they can bring to it, different life experiences. They interact with customers a little bit differently, as well as with a team a little bit differently. And I'm not entirely sure that it's necessarily because they're female. I think it's more just their life experiences, as well as, being female, and they had to also prove themselves to get where they had to be. But I think that anyone could do well in the engineering field and excel in the engineering field if you're willing to be humble about what you do and don't know, and be willing to open your mind and learn the things you don't know, as well as leverage the skills of those around you who might have a little bit more knowledge about certain topics.
I would have to agree with what Allison says as far as leveraging those around you and trying to learn as much as you can. I rely a lot on other engineers I know in the field. Like when I don't know something, I'm not afraid to tell somebody I'm not really sure about that answer. Let me find that information out for you. I think it's important to be continually seeking knowledge. I think that's something we learned at West Point when we were cadets. I mean, I feel like that's something that was hammered into me, that if you don't know something, then you should reach out and ask that question instead of just pretending to know it, because I feel like it doesn't help you prove that you want to continuously learn. It doesn't help you prove that you want to do a good job in your role as an engineer either.
Do you have mentors in your field?
I'd say for me, I don't have any one particular mentor. There are a couple of women in our engineering department who have been there for a little more than 20 years, and we're some of the pioneers in the engineering field when they were coming up. They'll talk about how they were the only woman in their mechanical engineering program when they were in college. And so they have quite a few experiences over the years with misogynistic comments, or people not thinking that they know what they're talking about, or quite a few cases where I've actually observed where the person they're talking to doesn't think that they know what they're talking about, even though my colleague knows far and away more than the person that they're talking to. So the proverbial mansplaining I've witnessed to these very experienced, highly educated, and very competent women. So they are some of the folks that I've looked to see that the experience and how they grew up in the engineering field.
Do you ladies feel like you're able to mentor others in the field?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I get tapped to do a lot. Having the military background, I was kind of surprised at how much some folks equate that experience with leadership experience. So I get tapped quite regularly to mentor some of the new folks who are getting hired on and they're just out of college, you know, they have the degree, but they don't have the work experience. We usually try to pair them with somebody to get them trained up and give them somebody that they can always go to when they're bouncing questions off of others and trying to learn both technologies as well as the industry itself. So I've mentored quite a few that have started in the company over the years.
I've done some mentorship with the local high school. They have a STEM program, and they actually have more women in their STEM program than they do men, which is really interesting in their STEM class. But I've gone to a few of their presentations, and I've sat down with some of the women or some of the girls program and talked to them about their future as an engineer and what they want to pursue, and spent some time just kind of helping them along the way with figuring out what they want to do and what engineering field they want to focus on.
Amberle, with that comment, both you and Allison have mentioned STEM and trying to get young people involved and interested in professions in the STEM realm earlier on, so that we can build a pipeline of people that are going to replace those who are going to age out of the profession in the near future. What other ideas do you guys have to increase diversity in the engineering field in the coming years?
I think a lot of it is going to be visible women in the field who can be that example. You know, I think we've seen, you know, throughout history from, you know, voting rights for women all the way, you know, on up, that having those few women out there who are visible and, you know, outspoken to be examples for other young women moving up will be really important. So those of us who are in the field, you know, being accessible to answer questions and talk about experiences and how to get in the field. And for those who are interested and decide to pursue the field, you know, providing them with the mentorship and the confidence building to continue to pursue the profession.
Can I ask, what does a day in the life look like for each of you?
My days are different every day, but from a broad perspective, it's talking with my customers on a daily basis, you know, design reviews to evaluate technologies and energy efficiency of those technologies and energy usage of those technologies. I spend a lot of time on the road and on site, so I'm on construction sites, you know, verifying that insulation and air sealing is done properly, educating folks in the field as to what they should be looking for from their contractors and whether or not their contractors are providing them with what they're paying their contractors to provide. So I go to a lot of design review with engineers and architects to give my input on what I've seen in the field from energy usage and different systems and planning a new building from both the air sealing and insulation standpoint, as well as the mechanical systems that go in that building, and what is going to make the most economic sense to invest in for long-term low energy costs.
A day in my life is essentially, I get up pretty early, but in the morning I'll start calling back clients, or if I have, a lot of times I'll have client meetings where I'll meet with clients to do scope development on their latest project. So one of my main goals is I develop the scope for whatever it is that we're going to be doing to provide our services to a client on their project. I also go out and I do some site visits, not a lot of site visits, but I'll do some, a few structural inspections if we need someone to go out, if one of our other engineers cannot go out. And then I also will prioritize our projects list for our EIT and our draftsmen, so they know which projects are the main focus for the day. And I go over those projects with them and review their work before it gets sent to the engineer for stamp. The majority of my day, though, is spent talking with clients for the most part, just trying to develop new projects and then discussing existing projects with them and figuring out where we're at, what we need to do, how we can.
So it sounds to me like you both have talked quite a bit about establishing your credibility from the perspective of you have to work a little bit harder, you have to prove yourself a little bit more than perhaps your male counterparts do. But as you describe a day in your life, you also talk about a lot of kind of EQ qualities or empathy and those sorts of things that will make you more effective at completing the projects to the customer's requirements. What resources would you recommend to someone considering engineering, given the broad array of tasks and skills it sounds like you have to be masterful at in order to be effective?
I'd say what's really helpful and what is at least common practice within my company is for folks to go on site and shadow a bunch of other engineers to see how they interact, the types of technologies they talk about. You, in the engineering field, you cannot know everything about everything. So everybody has a particular area where they're just more knowledgeable than any other area, and specializing in different areas is pretty common. So going out with some of those folks, talking with some of those folks about technologies and the work they do within that technology. And I've noticed with most folks that in my organization is once they do that, they gravitate toward a particular area that just happens to interest them a little bit more. So I think, keeping an open mind and trying out a bunch of things and talking with a whole bunch of different people and doing as much shadowing as you can to just see what it's like and get a sense for what the work would be like is really helpful, and figuring out where exactly you want to land doing your own work in the engineering field.
I would have to agree with that. I think going out and doing shadowing, even if you visited different types of engineers in different industries, would really help you to figure out where exactly you want to work and what type of engineering you want to pursue.
So our audience made up of West Point women, perhaps some cadets are listening, or some people considering transitioning out of service or just doing a career transition. What's some of the best advice that you've been given or that you've shared with others that you would like to pass on to our audience?
I think that one of the things that it seems to be really helpful for a lot of folks is some of the networking opportunities that we have as West Point grads. That was not in existence when I was transitioning out, so that wasn't as much of an opportunity. But reaching out on some of those networks, be it the AOG Career Services or the Facebook Careers and Networking pages, and just pinging the group and seeing who's in different fields and who's in your area who works in some of those fields that might interest you. I think most grads are willing to help other grads, if it's just having a conversation about the profession or taking them in under their wing for informational type interviews or a little bit of shadowing to help figure out if that's something that might interest you.
Yeah, I can echo that, Allison. I know networking is what helped me get the job that I got into after I left.
Yeah. And networking does, it seems kind of daunting because being in the military, you always hear that networking is the primary way to find a job. But I found it a little bit bewildering transitioning out just because I'd been in the military and I didn't know anybody in any industry or how to go about networking or, how to network without coming across like I was only doing it because I wanted something. And so I found that really challenging. And I ended up working with some of those junior military officer recruiter organizations at the time. And I ended up in a Fortune 500 company right off the bat. And I didn't particularly like it. So I did it because I didn't really know what else to do as I was transitioning out. And it took a little bit of testing the waters once I was out to figure out where exactly I wanted to land. But I definitely spent, a couple years doing things that I did not find fulfilling at all and didn't enjoy as I found my way around.
Yeah, to both you and Amberle's point about shadowing and experiencing other things to see where you might best fit.
Mm.
Amberle, what about you? Any advice you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would be to keep an open mind as you're going through the job transition process from the military to a new position. Mainly in that you don't always know that you're going to find the best fit the first time, the first job that you take. Like, it could be a really good learning experience, but it might not necessarily be the long-term fit for you. So I think one thing the military kind of ingrains in you is that you can never quit. You just have to keep moving forward. But the thing is in the civilian industry, you don't have to stay with a company that you're unhappy with. You can transition from that company and find a better opportunity or find something that is a better fit for you. I wouldn't do that right away, but I would probably, like, if something wasn't a fit for me in the first year or two, I would start looking for something else that would be more fulfilling. And that's really common in the civilian sector. And in the military, I feel like it's not something that is something that you do. You just kind of accept your position and continue working. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Amberle. Well, ladies, we are going to wrap it up here. And I really want to thank both Allison and Amberle for their time this evening and sharing their thoughts with us about their experiences in engineering. Before we close, I want to turn it back over to our panelists if you have any closing comments that you would like to close out.
I'd say no matter what you're going to do, if it's going to be transition or stay in, I think you got to do what makes you happy, or you're not going to be successful. I know one of the things that I heard, as I was applying to West Point is that if you're going to go to West Point, it needs to be because you want it. It can't be because your parents want you to do it or because you had a grandparent that graduated there. The only way to be successful is if you want it. And I think that applies to whatever profession that you choose after the military. You got to enjoy what you're doing, or why bother doing it? And it might take a little bit of trial and error as you're figuring out what exactly that could mean to you. But using that as a litmus test to figure out if something makes you happy and makes you feel fulfilled. Because otherwise, you'll hate getting up in the morning and going to work, and it'll, instead of feeling like you're making a contribution to society or to whatever industry you're in, you're just going to feel like you're dragging yourself around every day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would just echo what we talked about earlier with reaching out and trying to find other women within the field. I think the West Point Women Network is amazing. And there's a lot of professional women out there that are grads. So if you have a specific field of engineering or even just a specific field you're looking to go into, it doesn't hurt to send out a message to the other West Point women to see who's in that field and what questions you can ask them.
Absolutely. I know all of us are willing to help, and obviously the two of you so generously giving up your time earlier this month in preparation for tonight and then this evening. Really appreciate the insights that you both offered this evening, and I'm sure it'll be helpful to some of our West Point women. So thank you very much. And next month we'll be talking about women in leadership, which I think this naturally dovetails into that, as you guys talk so much about being a woman in leadership in a male dominated field. So thank you for teeing that up nicely for us.
Yeah, thank you for coordinating, and thanks to everybody who joined in.
Good night,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.